Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started here in a second. If you could please take your seats, fill up the coffee. There is an exciting opportunity this morning to hear from some really fantastic folks involved with New Deal and hear how they're protecting democracy across the country. Thanks for being with us here on a Friday morning after a long day yesterday. My name is Josh Maxwell. I'm a commissioner in Chester County, chair of the Board of Elections there. I've been a member of New Deal for, I think, over 10 years. And it is I have the great privilege of introducing your distinguished panel today. And I'm going to introduce them from someone else's eyes, if that's okay. In our purple county, in our purple state in Pennsylvania, I have a side gig teaching a class at a school called Lincoln University. Lincoln University is at HBCU. It's the first degree granting HBCU in the country. Among its graduates are Thurgood Marshall, a number of other amazing American citizens. And we have 15 kids in the class, 14 are young African-American women. And I offered them a job this year working the elections in our county. If anyone wants to make some extra money, they can come up to our county seat and help collect and count the ballots. And for you folks who run elections in your cities or counties, you know that that's flattening the ballots, opening the envelopes, moving things around, getting people pizza, and this is a huge operation that involves hundreds of people working together over a couple days. So a student in the class, Parker, fantastic student, said, I want to help. And she worked 2 8-hour shifts on election night with news media over there, Good Morning America in the morning, seeing if the seat in Pennsylvania was going to flip. And one of our obligations was to come back to the class and say what she learned. And so she came back to the class on Tuesday and said, talked about the different colors of the systems and what people were wearing to identify whether they were an employee or an observer. People are trying to use binoculars and having sheriffs take away the binoculars and the whole jazz. I was like, what was the experience like? She said, well, I'm from New York and I haven't had people kind of stand over me like that before. So in a purple county, we had a lot of people come from around the country to observe the elections there. A lot of people figuratively wearing red hats, standing over the young African-American woman in our election office, among a few others, making sure that they were counting the votes correctly. And it occurred to me while she was talking that this was probably not a brand new experience for her growing up African-American, but hearing her describe it to her peers had an impact on me. It made me realize that the panel that you're going to hear from and all of you involved with New Deal and elections are doing a lot more than just making sure our votes are counted every twice a year, sometime in the spring, sometime in the fall. There's a lot more at stake for folks like Parker down the line, 15, 25 years from now, that there's a democracy intact and that her rights to vote and those of her peers are protected, not just today, but 15 years from now. And that's not something we signed up to do when we were Democrats to run for office necessarily, but it's been what's left at our doorstep. So I just wanted to share that experience with you because I thought it was impactful for me. And we have some folks who are experts in running elections across the United States, and it is my privilege to introduce them today. First up, we have our Secretary of State of Michigan. Her name is Jocelyn Benson, and her resume is incredible. She has written a book called State Secretaries of State, Guardians of Democracy. She is chair of Michigan's Task Force on Women in Sports. She's a graduate of Harvard Law School and an expert on civil rights law, education law, and election law. She has served as dean at Wayne State University Law School in Detroit. She was appointed dean at the age of 36 years old, the youngest woman in U.S. history and of a top 100 accredited law school. You don't have to woohoo, you can just clap. She was an associate professor and associate director of Wayne Law's Damon Key Center for Civil Rights, so I invite Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson up. We also have a good friend of mine, Arizona Secretary of State-elect Adrian Fontes. Another name for the Secretary of State of Arizona is Chief Democracy Protector in the United States. There is probably not a tougher job in government right now besides being Secretary of State, but he is well served from having more than 4 years of active duty in the Marine Corps. and being a prosecutor in the Maricopa County Attorney General's Office and the Arizona Attorney General's Office. I don't know which one applies more to your job right now, but I like the combination of your Marine Corps service and your service as a prosecutor for defending democracy in the great state of Arizona. We also have the president of Democracy Fund, Joe Goldman. The Democracy Fund, if you're unaware, is an independent foundation that champions the leaders who fight for an inclusive, multiracial democracy. Joe serves on the board of directors of the Democracy Fund. Prior to working in philanthropy, how do you say that word? Philanthropy? Joe spent more than a decade organizing and facilitating large-scale public deliberations across the country, including the United New Orleans planning process after Hurricane Katrina. So I'll welcome Joe up as well. Thank you all very much.
Hey, everybody. Great to see you all and to be here. I first of all just want to authorize woo-hooing. I think there may be a bunch of depressing things we're going to talk about, but when you actually feel a sense of joy, woo-hoo. That is perfectly, yes, there you go. So I'm really excited to be here. I've been working on questions about the health of American democracy for my whole professional career, and particularly in the last 6 or 7 years, I have found myself constantly having to be in a process of calibrating and recalibrating my sense of the environment I'm operating in and what I'm up against. Because the forces at play are so great and so fluid, it's just a constant process to understand what it means to preserve a healthy and strong democracy. And especially coming out of an election cycle like this one, this is a really important opportunity for us to do that recalibration. And I have huge questions about what we just lived through and what its implications are for the future. And we've got two of the best people to answer those kinds of questions. So I think we're going to take a few minutes to let Jocelyn and Adrian give some opening remarks about their sense of the state of our election system. I'll ask a few questions and then we'll dive into a room-wide conversation. So why don't we start off with Jocelyn, just share a little bit about the state of our election system.
Thank you. Thanks, Joe, and really great to be here with my newest colleague, Secretary of State-elect Adrian Fontes from Arizona, who is going to be a key partner for us in this era that we are in, which is a multi-year, multifaceted, nationally coordinated effort to delegitimize democracy in our country. It's something that we lived through and fought through. I very closely with Katie in Arizona, particularly in battleground states in 2020, which we can talk about, and then again in 2022, where indeed voters were then given the opportunity to choose a democracy defender or a democracy denier in nearly every battleground state in the country, and that opportunity, which they embraced and resoundingly stood for democracy across party lines even, is really, to me, the headline that we need to be embracing in these next few years. Make no mistake, we're still in the middle of this challenging era, as was made clear by announcements of candidates for 2024 that were made in the days following the 2022 elections. This work is not over. In fact, it could be even escalating, and we may be meeting challenges that are more sophisticated and more well-organized than those in which we encountered in 2020. Yet we are also far more sophisticated, better organized, and we've got more folks on the board than we did in 2020 to fight for democracy, including the vast majority of voters in our country, which was overwhelmingly the message that voters delivered in 2022. So I think going forward, I have an extreme amount of hope and energy and optimism because of what I've lived through these last 3.5, 4 years, because I've only seen our democracy get stronger in the face of these challenges. I've only seen more people step up to engage in the fight in the face of these challenges. And as someone, as you heard, who's devoted my entire professional career from when I started in Montgomery, Alabama, working in Selma, inspired by those folks who stood at the foot of the Edmund Pettus Bridge in 1965 so that we could have a Voting Rights Act, this work is a continuation of their work. And we have only gotten stronger and better and more effective in these past few years as a result of the challenges we've incurred. So moving forward, let's buckle in, let's be clear-eyed about the challenges that we're facing, but let's know, and I'm very confident and be optimistic, that we can emerge from this moment with a stronger, healthier, more robust democracy than ever before, and that's what I'm fighting for.
Appropriate woohoos. Adrian?
Thank you very much. And thank you to the New Deal and everybody who's here who make up this family. Some of you heard me make a little mini speech last night, so I'll spare you all of that and go directly to something that I'm looking at, which is a little map here. It's the same as the logos you see. And I see where Michigan is, and I see where Arizona is. And this is a big, big place, and this is a big, big experiment. And we, as human beings, have never been here before. Now, about 250 years ago, some folks decided to try to do something different. And they decided to try to move us away from this idea that permeates every aspect of our storytelling and our narrative and our identities as human beings. And that's the divine right of kings, that individuals rise to power either through heredity or force. But it's covered by this divine right. And moving towards this idea of the rule of law, this idea, you went to Harvard, you'd know, this idea that the rules are more important. The Constitution is more important than any pride or any prejudice. The way that we treat one another under this blanket is much better. It is this experiment that we continue to see occasionally, the beaker dropping off the shelf and breaking. It did once, and it almost messed us up in the 1860s. We've seen other missteps in this experiment as we move forward, and right now we're in that next somewhat tentative phase of the experiment. And it falls to all of us to be able to recognize how critically important this moment in American history is, and really absorb that, sort of as a foundational issue. This really is a continuation of that shift from the divine right of kings as a ruling philosophy for all of our society into the rule of law as a real thing. And that's where I come at this from. Because when I was a young man, I decided that I needed to actually go to college, and the way that I had to do it was to write this country a blank check payable with my life if necessary. And when I enlisted in the Marine Corps, I knew that was a possibility. But that's how much this meant to me at the time, and it still means that much to me now. And so as we look through this with that very serious opening, we can figure that that young African-American woman in Pennsylvania who had those folks looking over her shoulder, she persevered, she pushed forward, she did what was the right thing to do in the face of that pressure. Jocelyn's felt that pressure. Right? I know you guys have experienced lots of threats and lots of crazy stuff. I've personally felt that pressure. You all know election administrators across the country who felt that. So when you ask where are we in our election systems, the function of the systems themselves are mostly pretty good. The election systems themselves are mostly pretty good, but they were designed to be run by people with honor and people with integrity. They weren't designed to be run by people who are willing to bend those systems to their own political end. And so when people say, why is the system broken? I tell them the system isn't broken. Some of the people who are trying to bust the system are. And so we're in a much bigger philosophical war right now. And I use sort of the battlefield stuff just because I'm used to it. But I think that's where we are, right? Because the systems are great. Michigan's got a good system. Arizona's got the best system in the United States of America. Sorry, everybody else. Particularly Maricopa County, because I built that system. No, but I think we're in a really interesting place. And there's an old curse, I'll end on this part, that some people say is a curse. I think it's a wonderful blessing. and it says, "May you live in interesting times." I don't know where it comes from, but boy, we are all there. And I'm super happy to be here with, and be the newest member on the team, Jocelyn with you, and Joe with you all, and I'm ready to get to work. Oh, the woohoos. Yeah, the woohoos are good.
Yes, this is going to be a thing the whole day. So it seems to me that given the pressures that the election system was under both this cycle and last cycle, it was not inevitable that we were going to end up on and after Election Day with very few stories of actual kind of the system breaking down. And I'm curious, like we had election deniers who had infiltrated the system at various levels. We had death threats against election officials. We had, just remarkable pressures. And I'm just kind of curious, from your vantage points, like, how did we make it through Election Day without catastrophic results? Like, what do you credit to?
As Secretary-elect Fontes said, the people ensured that democracy prevailed in 2020, and people showed up in record numbers in 2022 to double down on that commitment to democracy. It was really interesting. I voted in person at my precinct in Detroit on Election Day, and whether I'm voting in person or from home in an election, I always stop by the precinct at the beginning of the day and thank everyone and say hi. And I've done that now throughout my term, many elections. The moment I walked into our precinct, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. It was like I was met with this whoosh of energy that was sheer determination from every poll worker that was there, alongside their clerk who in Detroit, who's also stepped up and become extraordinary over the last few years, and always has been. But this determination that you could feel, this energy that no one's going to take away our voice or our vote, not on our watch. That's really what has escalated and emerged in Detroit, in Michigan, and in battleground states, and in all states around the country. We've heard stories of one or two bad apples in election administration here or there, but they are far and few in between at the local level. And sometimes they're exacerbated to, for hyperbolic ends, which is frustrating to me because the 99.9% of election administrators and poll workers around this country are dedicated on both sides of the aisle to democracy, dedicated to making sure the system works. I know Adrian has seen this firsthand in Arizona, where we're all trying to provide support for the local clerks there, and he was once one to make sure that these professionals have the support they need to withstand the storm that we all find ourselves in. But what's really been encouraging and really inspiring to me is how far and to what extent people on both sides of the aisle at the local level, local clerks, local poll workers, have doubled down and put their foot on the accelerator to defend democracy in this time. And that's what gives me the most energy and hope that, again, we won't just succeed in 24, yet again defending the will of the people, should it be challenged again. We're going to emerge from that election with a stronger, healthier, more robust democracy, because people have now come face to face with the prospect of losing it, particularly in these battleground states where we live, where there were actual human beings serving as false electors, showing up outside our state capitol to try to seize the electoral college vote from the voters in our state. They failed. But yet, knowing those pressures are abundant amongst us from outsiders has caused so many inside the system to really step up and fight alongside voters who have been turning out in record numbers as well in our states. So that's all things to give us hope and energy, but it's all due to people standing and defending their democracy, which is indeed the only thing that will ever ensure that it prevails.
Thank you. So Adrian, I mean, when I looked at the map going into this election cycle, like the place I was most worried about was Arizona in terms of threats against local election officials.
We showed you, didn't we?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, what do you credit to the ability to make it through this cycle?
Really, I have to parrot a little bit of what Jocelyn said and talk about a smidge how we used that same spirit, that same determination, and amplified that particular message in my campaign. And this gets into a little bit of the political. First and foremost, it was the people. And second, the threats are not anywhere near over. This was just one thing, and even after the election, I think he came out a week ago or a little bit less, Bill Gates, the chairman of the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, has been in an undisclosed location protected by law enforcement because of the threats against him. And Recorder Richer, who replaced me as the Maricopa County Recorder, has also had law enforcement parked outside of his house many weeks in a row, several times over the last couple of years. So this is real. But I think one of the things that really where the American voters came through this time and in Arizona was sort of illustrated by a commercial that we did in my campaign. Jocelyn, you mentioned that we know what it is, or we came to think about what it might be to lose our democracy because we hadn't lost it. Well, there's a large segment of our population who, in our narrative, in the Latino population, we come from places and we understand through relationships places where we have lost it. And my English language commercial, I only did like one, I think, because that's all I could afford. We talked about pioneers and trailblazers and Arizona's independent spirit. And they went to translate it into Spanish for the Spanish language one, and it didn't. Anna's nodding her head over here. How do you translate the idea of coming from east to west across the plains to folks who've been here since the 1600s, who've been in the United States, or what is now the United States of America forever? Right? There's a reason everything in California is named San something, right? Because our folks have been here for a very long time. And so instead of saying pioneers and trailblazers and independent spirit, we said that we have to preserve our democracy porque sabemos lo que es perderlo, because we know what it's like to lose it, because we understand Venezuela. We understand what happens with strongmen in Panama. That's our collective storytelling as Latinos in the United States of America. So the idea that we know what it's like to lose it, or we can imagine what it's like to lose it, was particularly pervasive in the Latino community. And so in Arizona, I wanted to push that message as hard as possible because that's what was at the core of this. So as much as it was the determination and the strong efforts and the grit of our election workers, it was the American voter in Michigan, in Arizona, in Wisconsin, and in Pennsylvania and other battleground states that really made this thing happen. And that's what kind of elevates me and what makes me, positive about where we're at moving forward. And so I think that was really, really an important idea, and I think we can capitalize on it and build on it and continue to move forward away from this American authoritarianism.
Can I just push you on? So having a leader in charge of your elections, tabulating your election results in an undisclosed location has real implications for the people who are going to be managing election processes in the future. Like, what has the effect been on local election officials all the way down to poll workers in terms of the willingness to play those roles? And what do we need to do to ensure that we have the people to run these elections?
No doubt the impact has been severe and noticeable. The Brennan Center for Justice, who I've worked with a lot, has put out some numbers about 1 in 6 election workers across the United States of America have either experienced direct threats or feel threatened. And I will tell you, Arizona's only got 15 counties. We lost the county recorder in Yavapai County to harassment. We lost the county recorder in Yuma County to harassment. We lost the county recorder in Pinal County to harassment. We lost the chief deputy recorder who replaced me in Tucson in Pima County because she was sick and tired of it. We were about to lose Coconino County, the greater Flagstaff area. Those outside of Maricopa County are the 5 most populous counties that exist. And this is over 115, 120 years worth of collective experience because these folks didn't sign up for this. But, right, here's where the hope comes in. There are folks who are stepping up who understand this new environment. I became the Maricopa County Recorder in 2016 after that election. And in January of 2017, elections were designated by the Department of Homeland Security to be critical infrastructure. So I don't know an election environment that is not already under scrutiny for security and considered something that is of that import, just sort of in the day-to-day world. So the shift away from the only civilian, very sort of like, hey, let's go vote kind of attitude isn't something that's new to me. It's always been there for me. Jocelyn, your experience is probably very different, having seen the whole shift. But the impact, as illustrated by those examples that I've given you, is real. But again, there is hope, and it's rough. I mean, my own experience. I know, Jocelyn, you've had yours, and Janice in Detroit. You know, she got harassed that one time. She was with me in Congress testifying a year and a half ago. My kids had to leave the house for 3 days. And the 3 girls had go bags sitting there waiting for the call to get in the car and leave. I mean, this is real. But we will, as they say, persist.
I mean, what's your experience been of kind of brain drain and within your election system?
I mean, I have a very sort of innate view that we embrace challenges as an opportunity to get stronger and work with our clerks to provide not just support, but that kind of ethos and recognition. And we've seen as a result, I mean, the other side of it is a entirely new, energized influx of folks who have been eager to do these roles, not in a partisan way, but in a nonpartisan professional way, which is really critical. We've also seen clerks on the Republican side in Ottawa County and Kent County really lean into the truth, really lean into increasing their transparency in an effort to lead with facts and ensure that citizens can have that rightly placed faith in their elections. So the harassment has been real. It's something that is a daily phenomenon in our state, at the state and local and even poll worker level. But we work to really encounter that with strength. And to do so with the knowledge that the truth is on our side, that the law is on our side, that the vast majority of people in our state are on the side of democracy. And clerks have really stepped up as a result of that, both on the Republican side and on the Democratic side, and independent clerks as well. We've done more audits over the last several years as professional audits than ever before in our state. We've seen clerks do even more to meet the needs of voters that have questions, with town halls and other types of pro-transparency antidotes to the misinformation that is really flowing into communities all across our state. We've also seen clerks have a larger voice in our state. People know not just who secretaries of state are, but who our local election officials are as well, which means with that increased spotlight comes increased attention to these positions and more people potentially wanting to serve in them. So the long-term effects of this, while there are certainly people who have stepped away and we've lost that professional experience, at the same time, there have, for everyone we've seen who've stepped away, we've seen 10 others rise to fill their shoes. We've recruited 30,000 new election workers in 2020, another 11,000 election workers in 2022. Young people, professionals, attorneys, people who are committed to democracy. So our work is to support those in the system and help them stay. But if they choose to leave, make sure that we're working to recruit individuals to come in and fill those roles with a clear-eyed understanding of the stakes. I'll just kind of pinpoint that to say what Steve and Richard and Bill Gates have really endured in Maricopa, for no significant truthful reason. Like they had, ballots which we've all dealt with, that sometimes machines don't read, and then you adjust it and you fix it, which they did, and you move on. Here they had people ready to seize on those issues and then use them, exacerbate them as a way to defy democracy and defy the will of the people. That effort failed, but the human collateral is real. And so what we're also doing, and what we've started doing a lot more than ever before in our community, is supporting each other. I'm consistently reaching out to Stephen and Bill saying, what more do you need from us? What can we learn from you? Same with folks in Pennsylvania who've also dealt with things, and New Mexico who've also dealt with things. So building the fabric of our community so that we support each other, knowing that these threats are not abating, but that we can do things to help them make us stronger as a community dedicated to democracy has been our focus, particularly in battleground states. And I'm, frankly, really energized and excited to get to work with an expanded collection of colleagues in Arizona, in Nevada, and in Pennsylvania in the weeks ahead and the years ahead, because that's only going to make us more prepared for whatever challenges come our way.
So before we open it up to the group, I'd just love to hear each of you say a word about, as we look to 24, what are the most important things that policymakers and others can do to bolster our election system coming into 24? Yeah.
Well, I was on the Hill talking to a couple of folks about it, and I'll ask you to say the same thing to your friends and neighbors who happen to either sit on the House of Representatives side or the U.S. Senate side. There's $400 million of election administration money in the draft omnibus bill right now, and we need to make sure that does not become a bargaining chip to be pitched away in favor of some other pet project. It's a pittance as compared to what we need, and it certainly isn't anywhere near the $4 billion that Senator Klobuchar has advocated for, as she did in a letter to the president earlier this year. But it's something that we need, and we need it now. And as people in government, you know why. Because we've got to go through planning and RFP and acquisition and implementation and then finally execution. And guess what? In a state like Arizona, we've got a presidential preference election, which is our primary, coming up in March of 2024. How many months away is that? Like 15, 16? It's not far. And so many of your states are going to be going through the same thing. And in election administration, this is a 365-day-a-year job. And we constantly have to be planning cycles and cycles ahead. So the one thing I think that folks should be aware of is that there is a very, very real potential that, sorry to be so redundant, that all of that potential set of resources doesn't happen. And I hope that you all can call your folks and help out every single township, municipality, and county and state election administrator do our jobs better in 2024.
So beyond federal resources, what else do we need to make sure it gets in place?
Well, certainly the funding piece is critical, and we can't, underscore enough how that's perhaps the most pivotal issue that can help us in the states ensure that we have the resources that we need to do our jobs. And it's something that enabled us to overcome significant challenges in 2020, the pandemic being one of them, but also is critical to helping us meet the needs of our voters and fight the misinformation in our states moving forward, which of course is directly linked to the threats. And the other policy issue that is really needs to be center stage is more stringent protections for poll workers and election officials. Senator Ossoff has introduced legislation at the federal level talking about the importance of this. We're continuing to support that, but at the state level as well. The first thing I'm going to do in this new term is call on our newly Democratic leadership elected in the state legislature and state senate in Michigan to pass legislation to make it a felony to threaten an election worker. This is a no-brainer to me, and will really go far at ensuring we have accountability to those who have been perhaps mobilized or armed with misinformation, really threatening the lives of those officials whose simple job it is to make the trains run on time in this world of democracy. The other thing, although I'll mention, though, and what I have learned as someone who came into this with decades of work in the legal policy side of election administration and then was charged with implementing automatic voter registration, election day registration, no reason absentee voting, and now early voting in Michigan as the chief election administrator. Those were policies enacted by voters in our state proposal system, is how important it is that we implement policies well, not just pass good policies. And the key to implementing policies well is not just having people in the system who are going to follow the data and the facts and with sufficient resources make all the right decisions and how to meet the goals of those is supporting the legislation or the policy, but that we really engage citizens in every aspect of the process. And I'll just pinpoint that with this one quick anecdote of what to me was the most the darkest moment, frankly, following the 2020 election. The darkest moment for me was not the night that armed protesters gathered outside my home, threatening my family, and for 45 minutes, standing outside, yelling into a bullhorn. It's been well televised. Things like "you're murderers" and all of those things, trying to get me to stop the certification of our election. That was a dark moment, but the darkest moment was actually a few weeks before that, when the Wayne County Board of Canvassers was meeting. And we had done everything up to that point, 2 weeks following the election, to give them all the resources and support they needed to know that they should certify their results, which was their legal duty. And I came home that night knowing that because the former president had personally called the 2 of the 4 Republican members of that commission, that they would likely not certify, and for no other reason other than political. and that would kick it up to the state, which could potentially block certification, and that was going to be the first domino to fall in what was a clearly coordinated effort to block certification, not just in Michigan, but in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, in Georgia. Ours was the first domino to fall, and I wanted to stop that domino from falling because I knew what could, the other certifications that would be blocked as a result, and really that this was part of the plan to submit an alternate slate of electors and all the rest. And I came home that day defeated because we had done everything we could, and we still were going to lose. And we were going to take the defeat, and we had a plan. We were going to go to court. We had a plan. And I still get goosebumps and almost emotional talking about what happened next. Hundreds of people showed up to the county commission meeting, to the Board of Commissioners meeting, and demanded that their vote count, testifying again and again and again with truth and the law on their side, that these commissioners had a legal duty to certify that election. And lo and behold, after several hours of testimony of citizens, young and old, saying, count my vote, they decided, indeed, to count those votes and certify the election. And so none of us can ever forget that it's those people who really saved democracy in 2020 and beyond, that it's the voters who elected defenders of democracy in 2022. And so as we, all of us, engage in policy work, knowing that we're also organizers in the field, what I've lived through firsthand is a clear knowledge that all the policies and all the officials in the world can't supplement the importance of the people being organized at the local level to speak the truth and demand that their voices be heard. That is what always will ensure democracy prevails. And it gives me a lot of hope because we're seeing more of that happen. But we can't forget that that is a critical component of all the work that we do.
Can I hear a woohoo? So I think we have a few minutes to kind of open it up for questions from the group. I think somebody's got microphones. Anybody want to join the conversation? Right over here.
I think that's the woohoo table,
Hey,
isn't it?
good morning. I'm wondering if I can, if for the Democracy Fund, actually, I've got some questions. I'm mayor of Boise, Idaho. And so, we just elected in our state a great Republican election protector. I'm so grateful for our Secretary of State, or elect. But my question is more about if, as a city, we're not doing elections, but we're seeing a rise in extremism everywhere. People at my doorstep, people at City Hall, the intimidation that happens, the weapons that they use. And I'm wondering if you have examples of cities who have ventured into the space of helping convene folks to combat or speak out against the extremism.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly happy to say a word, but I'm sure the two of you have a lot of experience in your respective states. What we've certainly seen over the last few years is a remarkable network of nonprofit organizations that are kind of bringing learnings and experience from international examples of what we need to do to mitigate the threat of political violence. I think that starts with recognizing it's a problem and finding kind of anchors in communities that are going to take these issues deeply, deeply seriously, and create effectively a united front against extremism and hate. I think our experience is that people are awake to these concerns. And what I've been trying to do from my position at the Democracy Fund has been connect the folks who are working on political extremism with the folks who are working on mis and disinformation, with the folks who are working on election administration and election crises, to make sure that across these different disciplines, you have infrastructure that's being built together. And I think, what Jocelyn was talking about, that the people who showed up at that canvassing board, that did not just happen out of nowhere. That happened because there was an infrastructure that had been built across the state of Michigan that was paying attention and waiting for the point where you actually had a threat that could fundamentally undermine the system. And I think that there is this process of building infrastructure that's needed. I don't know if you would want to.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. That infrastructure is key, and those partnerships are critical. So for us, there have been three specific. I mean, because we look at it, there have been three specific kind of leadership groups that we've reached out to on to combating extremism, the potential for violence, misinformation, particularly at the polls, faith leaders, business leaders, and sports leaders, and working directly and collaboratively with them. There's also a robust nonprofit infrastructure as well, and civic engagement infrastructure that's been built over time that's helpful, but those are not always the best messengers to get to certain people who aren't already part of the civic engagement world. So faith leaders, we have a pastor, for example, at every polling place to help de-escalate something if they occur. As just one example, we have sports leaders doing things at games, pre and post and during games to talk about and to spread both truthful information and various, whatever the message and the content is that we want to provide. We work with these key messengers who are trusted voices in communities that are hit with misinformation, and that's been extremely effective, particularly faith leaders, but then business leaders as well also can get at some of with employees and large companies can also leverage their influence to assist with a lot of different things, and even just host conversations around the misinformation or other things that are feeding the extremism.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, in-group moderates are a important component of dealing with extremism, and I think that, like in Arizona, having a Republican leader willing to stand up in Maricopa County for the system is like absolutely crucial to be able to deal with the threats that are going on. I mean, what has your experience been?
Well, it isn't just Bill Gates. I mean, you're talking about Rusty Bowers, you're talking about former U.S. Attorney Paul Charlton, former Maricopa County Attorney Rick Romley, very conservative, stalwart Republicans who will never be anything but and are little d Democrats for the United States of America. And I think in addition to a lot of what Jocelyn said, one of the other critical components in battling back against this extremism is you. It's public servants across the board making sure that when you're talking about whether it's water policy, education policy, housing policy, or any of the rest of it, you include sort of that bit about, and it all hinges on democracy, because we are all part of this same system. It's the one thing that binds it all. You know, the campaign trail, I always said, it was, the elections are the golden thread that bind the fabric of our society together. And if you pull that thread out, the entire fabric disintegrates. And so I think we all bear a bit of that responsibility in our city council meetings, in our county commission meetings, to just give that nod occasionally, just to kind of reinforce these ideas. And I think it gives the moderate Republicans, these folks who do believe in democracy, sort of that little bit of edge to be able to nod their heads, if that's all they get to do, to acknowledge that, yes, we do need to perpetuate the republic through the exercise of free and fair democracy.
So I think we have time for one more question, if anybody's got one.
There's one back there.
Okay, back here.
Good morning. I'm Scott Holcomb from Atlanta, and really appreciate your optimism. It's very refreshing to hear, and in many ways inspiring. Like one very quick anecdote, my good friend Elena Parent here, who's a state senator, she was the subject of Herschel Walker sending out a tweet of two blonde women counting votes in Pennsylvania. State Senator Jen Jordan, another New Deal leader who's not here, and Elena, and then she got death threats off it. I know you all experienced that too. It's really, really serious what we're dealing with. We just elected a lieutenant governor who was a fake elector, like an actual fake elector. And so we're dealing with this, and we passed a bill that privately our colleagues told us, we don't think this is necessary and we don't want to do it, but we have to do it to placate the base. And it's extraordinarily challenging. And in my mind, it's still a question mark of where we go. And this is what I want to ask you. I think those of us that were in the battleground states, we got constant misinformation. A lot of it was from Gateway Pundit and all these like purported sources. And I tried to engage sometimes, and I tried to send them actual information. I would even send them actual information from our Republican Secretary of State, and they didn't want to hear it because it was counter to their worldview. And I never thought that I would live in a time when democracy was in peril, and we had conversations about that. And I never thought that we'd live in a world where facts are now subjective. But they are for a lot of people. And so my question is, have you had any success getting through to people on an individual basis, or is the battle we just have to make sure that we're 50% plus one for democracy to survive?
Well, so I think there's two approaches that can work together. I'll give a good example of the approach that Maricopa County and Stephen Richer and Bill Gates and the rest of the board have taken, and they have expended countless hours and dollars carefully issuing reports and answering questions and doing all of that stuff that good election administrators, good governing people would do. And so that the official record is very, very clear. There was nothing wrong with any of the elections that we've experienced thus far. That's one approach, and that's one way to engage. The other way to engage comes from, you'll forgive me, my experience as a trial lawyer. You look to the audience, and you find out what messages they may want to receive. How do you deliver that message? And so you have Maricopa County's very civil, very government, very bureaucratic example of just answering the questions with facts. And you have a method that I've used to some success of attacking the hell out of the fascists and using a tone and a tenor of attack against this anti-American sentiment, of attack against authoritarianism, of attack against seditionists because of what they've done to our Constitution and what they're threatening to do to our country. That is an approach that, forgive, a lot of Democrats aren't used to using. But this old Marine reached back into his experience and said, this is going to land with some of these folks, because I served with some of these folks. And that message in some ways and in various examples, it got through because the framing was different and the delivery was different. And so I think we have to kind of humble ourselves to the public a little bit. We tend to, because we understand complexity of systems and how processes work and how this entire thing balances out in the end, and we forget we're talking to people who feel aggrieved, and what they know is they've got to get to that second job on time, and their uniform better be clean, and there better be gas in the car, and the air on that one tire, hope it holds through, et cetera, et cetera. They're not hearing all of this extra stuff. They just want it short, simple, quick, and meaningful. And sometimes you have to make that emotional connection. So maybe it's just a question of, and maybe it's not that simple, but that is one example of what has worked with me, and I'm happy to continue delivering that message, because there will be, as I've indicated, there will be no appeasement from this Secretary of State.
I think the answer is all of the above. I mean, we've had, I could say 3 years ago in a meeting of all the secretaries of state, there was no real clear path on how to effectively combat misinformation. That's no longer the reality. We've become better at it, and through employing all the tactics that my colleague just talked about and more. But what I'll say is that we kind of break down into this, the 30% of people who have been fooled and lied to by people who continue to lie, even though election denialism has been exposed across the country now as a losing strategy by and large. It's still a strategy, and it's still a strategy that will continue. So we have to be clear-eyed about that, enter the battle appropriately, and make sure that we are keeping the 51% and growing that majority, which has been a lot of our focus, particularly in 2022. And then also having a component to reach those who have been misled and lied to in a way that's effective. My colleague, Al Schmidt from Philadelphia, talks a lot about the adage of it's a lot easier to fool someone than tell someone convince someone they've been fooled. And that's true. I mean, and it's, I don't think we can go into this expecting to eradicate misinformation, because it's been a clear strategy levied not just by American officials, but foreign entities trying to dismantle democracy. And of course we have everything happening in the world of social media right now that is only going to fuel that international effort to misinform our public. So I think, to me, it gets back to, I started my work as a civil rights advocate. You don't engage in civil rights work thinking you'll ever solve all of the problems of structural racism and other inequalities in our country, but you fight anyway. And you fight because every time you fight, you get a little bit further along the path towards justice. And that, to me, is the work that we're all called to do. And we can't be discouraged if we don't reach that full 100%, if we don't eradicate misinformation. We can be emboldened and inspired instead by the gains we make along the way, all the while knowing that the gains are not sufficient to winning the war. But the war is in many ways an endemic aspect of our democracy. The war over truth, the war over information, the war over people's voices being heard. That's been a battle that our country's been engaged in since the inception of our democracy. And so all we have to do right now is choose to fight and to continue that fight in the most sophisticated and effective way as possible, building our troops as effectively as possible with truth, with the law on our side, and with the Constitution and with history on our side. And that's what keeps us going, and knowing, again, that we're all living in interesting times, that we're all called in this moment to step up and fight. And Georgia is uniquely on the front lines of that fight in so many ways, as is Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania. And so I think we embrace that role as an exciting opportunity to continue the work of those who've come before us, to fight for a democracy, to fight for truth, knowing that that's the work we've been called to do, that we choose to do, and that we evaluate based on making that choice and be as effective as we can in furthering that decision to fight.
And I guess I would just put in a small pitch for local journalism that, until we rebuild local institutions that have trusted relationships in community, people are going to rely on these other sources of information. And Georgia in particular there's been a lot of really innovative work to purchase local news organizations and build up nonprofit news organizations, right? This is the future that needs to be part of the story. And as public officials, the partnership between government, philanthropy, journalism, in order to build these kinds of institutions becomes an important part of the process.
If I could just give one data point on that. When I first ran for statewide office in 2010, when I ran for Secretary of State, I met with 18 local newspaper editorial boards for endorsement interviews. 18, all across the state. Battle Creek, Jackson, Traverse City, everywhere. In 2018, 2. 8 years. Because the others were no longer either in service or didn't have enough resources to actually meet with the statewide candidate and consider endorsements, and we're doing endorsements. 18 to 2 in 8 years. So yeah, I think that is a really big flag for us seeking to ensure we have an informed and engaged electorate to invest in.
So I'm sure we could continue this conversation for another hour or so, but I think we have to move the agenda along, but really want to thank both of you for your leadership and for being with us today. Can I have a woohoo? Thanks so much.